If you click this video, you probably have one of the three following major questions on your mind. Is this character a massive upgrade, and will I struggle without her? Do I need to get this character's custom elite weapon? And how many fortification segments do I need, if any? So we're going to go over those today, and I'm going to answer all those questions, and we're going to also talk about future considerations for team building and alternatives if maybe you don't want to pick the character up after all. So is this character a massive upgrade, and will I struggle without her? Let's start with the elephant in the room. The game actually isn't that hard, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. The difficulty for almost all the story content and the main game content is very approachable. The only content that's really, quote, end game content right now is Gunsmoke Frontline and the weekly expansion drills. And it's most likely going to stay that way for the foreseeable future. We don't have any very difficult gameplay modes coming out. We've already previewed what the other servers have, so we kind of know what to expect going forward. So at worst, maybe you have difficulty in some of the higher frenzy levels on the expansion drills. That being said, she does set a new baseline for what you can expect overall for a team's damage output. This is partially because of her personal AoE damage output, which is pretty high. And then following that, all the other teammates that can synergize well with her that allows the team's overall damage to kind of go way higher than it would individually. Now, this does get matched and even surpassed later on by other team types. But for now, this is kind of like going to be the new standard baseline that you expect to see out of a team's damage, right? It's less of a focus on individual units and more about overall how much does the 4 or 5 man team do in any given content or scenario. I plan on doing a separate video kind of about power creep because that's related to this topic, but not really. So that separate video about power creep will talk about some of the issues related to that, but I would actually argue that this is not really power creep. Especially with the game being this young, this is kind of setting a baseline for where you would kind of expect most of the characters in the next year or maybe 2 years of release to kind of level out at. That being said, if you plan on not grabbing this character, it's not going to be the end of the world. There's going to be plenty of other opportunities. There's going to be plenty of other team types, any other characters to grab. So if you don't like her for whatever reason, don't feel obligated that you're going to, like, quote, brick your account by not grabbing her. There'll be plenty of other replacements out there or other team types that you can focus your resources on. Okay, with that out of the way, so for the short to long term, she's going to be by far one of the strongest AoE units in the game for quite a foreseeable period of time. I would say at least probably the next year. And she will be a good solid foundation for any sort of corrosion type based team you want to do. So the next big question, do I need to get the character's custom elite weapon? No. The short answer is no. So for the highest possible output of damage, yes. But Planeta is a pretty competitive option as well. I've seen a lot of discussion over like which one to grab and which one's the best, but I haven't seen any serious like numbers or anything. The only information I've seen related to this topic was like one chart with damage numbers and no context as to like how they got those numbers or anything. So I'm going to throw up on the screen here some very quick calculations I did. Looking quickly at these numbers, it's pretty obvious that if you once you account for the difference in attack power and the attack versus crit on the different weapons, they actually come out to almost about the exact same amount average damage per hit, which is pretty easy for then calculating which one's better because all you got to look at is the traits and the weapon calibration ability. So, but this is obviously where Skyla pulls very far ahead. In Planeta's best case scenario, it's gonna be behind about 10%. In the worst case scenario for Planeta, it's gonna be behind about 20%. So you can decide whether that's worth an upgrade and worth grabbing. I also am not including things like the imprint bonus, which once again would make Skyla pull even further ahead if you were to include that into the calculation here. This is kind of just a rough scenario of what to expect with the weapon. Personally, if you're not a super huge fan of the character and you don't have a ton of extra tickets floating around, it's probably, in my opinion, better just to say for the next character, Michti, or G11, as some of you might know her, she will be a larger increase to the overall damage, not only for Klukai, but for the rest of the team. By existing, Michti gives the whole team 35% corrosion damage, which is a pretty solid bonus. And even when you include some of her other bonuses, it actually creeps up a little bit past 40%. So those tickets are probably better invested in a character like Michti, which will not only fill a slot on the team, but also boost the team's damage overall, not just one character. And finally, let's talk about the question that I've seen posted all over the internet nonstop. How many fortification segments do you need? So Klukai is a rather unique case in that her vertical investment is actually very viable. As you grab segments for her, her personal damage is going to start to scale like crazy. And then in addition to that, the team-wide damage with Pritia and Michti will also start to scale. And you'll finally see some very large outputs from the team overall. However, to actually assemble all the things that you need to make that a very strong team, you either need to really, really like the character, or it starts to get very debatable, right? So you would need segment 3 or segment 6. You'd need Michti, you'd need Pritia, and then you would also need segments and weapons for those characters, ideally as well. So it starts to get very prohibitive in how much you want to invest. I mean, you're investing like multiple characters worth of resources into one particular team. So when it comes to fortification and fortification segments, it's really kind of a concern only for Gunsmoke Frontline. In normal content, she's just going to obliterate anything that's not actually a boss. This will probably be the vast majority of gameplay experiences most players will see. So grabbing segments is primarily for Gunsmoke Frontline, but that's really only even needed then if you really want to rank high and you're trying to go for some really high placement slots. Two reasons for this. One, it's usually better to have multiple different teams for Gunsmoke Frontline. That way you can average higher scores overall across all your runs. And secondly, investing in a fortification segment 3 or 6 character to move your platoon's ranking up is not a great use of resources. You're spending literally hundreds of pulls to get a return of 50 collapse pieces every 2 or 3 weeks. I think it's every 3 weeks for Gunsmoke. That's not really a good use of your resources, unless, like I said, unless you're trying to go for some very high score runs, or you and your platoon are trying to make like the top 100 ranks or something like that. But even in just normal global server, just showing up and consistently having you and your platoon consistently do the runs every day and scoring as well overall will probably get you top 5%, as long as you guys are consistent. So once again, you only really need segment 3 or segment 6 if you're trying to do some really high Gunsmoke Frontline placements, or maybe you're doing some other sort of challenge runs for other content. But in normal content, for the vast majority of the game, you do not need these segments. They are a bonus. They're kind of unnecessary. And you're probably better using those resources to either get another character like Michti, or to invest in just more characters overall so you have more gameplay options. So with that being said, the first big breakpoint is at segment 3, and the second big breakpoint is at segment 6. So segment 3 allows you to do double ults back to back, and it increases the damage it does versus single target bosses by a significant amount, 50%. And it also allows for characters like Pritia to do multiple follow-up attacks on the target as well. I'm going to show a graphic here comparing segment 3 and segment 6, along with the number of damage instances that Pritia will do in a follow-up attack. And keep in mind, this also works for her second skill as well, Overpowering Corrosion. It adds another damage instance to that, allowing Pritia to do a second follow-up attack on that as well. The other big breakpoint is at segment 6. And as expected, this is where she kind of goes crazy, right? It pretty much removes the cooldown from the ult and allows triple follow-up attacks from Pritia on every single one of the ult casts. So this segment results in a massive personal gain in DPS, as well as a huge spike in the team's overall DPS through Pritia doing numerous follow-up attacks. It also allows a very, very strong debuff that it puts on all the enemies that are hit. And at this point, skill 2, Overpowering Corrosion, pretty much hits map wide. And to be honest, this is kind of expected of a segment 6 character. Usually they always break the rules in one way, shape, or form. Just be aware that this is 7 or more characters worth of tickets that you're going to be spending on one character. So it is drastically going to reduce your team building options and just the number of different ways you can play the game, right? You're pretty much going to be using Klukai on every single team because that's probably the only character you have unlocked. And maybe you'll be able to afford 1 or 2 other characters after that. So So if it's something you want to invest in the long term, or you save tickets up from day one and you want to grab her, go ahead. Just like I said, be aware that you're going to have very limited team building options. So let me just close this out with some final thoughts and maybe give some recommendations to anyone who's still kind of on the fence and they're not sure if they want to invest in the character or not, or go really deep into the segments. So luckily we play on the global server and we get to kind of look forward into the future and see what's coming up through the CN releases. Now that is a double-edged sword because it takes away some of the hype and some of the excitement of trying out the new characters. However, it is really good for investing in characters and building your account long-term, as you kind of get to know ahead of time what's good, what's not good, what needs some work, etc. So one of the takeaways we know for a fact is that this character does not get replaced anytime soon. This team, the Corrosion team, stays viable for quite a long time and doesn't hit any hard walls as far as game content. That being said, we also know that there's multiple other teams that get a big power boost in the future as well and kind of meet the Corrosion team and Klukai in damage overall. And the devs know this as well, which is why they have previewed Vector already. Vector and the Fire team is a very powerful team. It provides similar overall team damage, especially as you invest more and more in it and you get more and more segments for the characters on that team. The overall team damage starts to be very comparable and sometimes can even surpass the Corrosion team. And they're not the only one either. The same thing for the Hydro team. They also get some very strong characters through Springfield and some fixed keys and neural upgrades for Tololo, and it keeps them very competitive in the overall team-wide damage race. So when trying to make your decision on whether you want to grab segments for this character or not, or if you just want to get the character at all, you have to consider a couple different things, one of which being, do you want a large roster or a smaller roster that's built on a specific couple characters? Do you want multiple team building options, or do you want to just use the same team for a large variety of content? Is that enjoyable to you? Do you find that fun? Some people do really enjoy taking one character, pushing them as far as they can go, and then just using that one character for everything. And that's totally a viable way to play the game. Other things you want to consider are special game modes or special bosses that they introduce. Having a larger roster allows you to meet the different requirements of bosses in different ways. For example, if a boss has lots of ads and needs the ads to be AoE down, well, Klukai would be great. But if the boss is specifically single target and maybe has resistance to corrosion damage somehow, Klukai and her team might struggle a little bit. So let me just give my personal recommendation on the character. She's great to pick up, but I prefer large rosters and lots of team building options over one vertically invested character. And because of that, I would say that if you are a free-to-play or you don't have a lot of tickets saved up, maybe you're not doing great on your 50/50s, I would grab just Klukai, then I would wait for the banner for Michti, I would grab her, and then I would focus on grabbing weapons for those characters. Especially for Klukai, if you don't have a lot of ARs, I think getting her AR is a very good use of tickets. If you have multiple planetas sitting around your account, then it's not as big of a deal, but you want to have as many 5-star weapons on the characters that you're using as possible. That's going to increase the overall damage output by a significant margin, as opposed to just having one strong weapon on one character. If you really, really like the character, I would grab segment 3 if you have the tickets available. Don't bankrupt yourself. Save a couple for Michti in the next banner, and then maybe loop back around at the next rerun for banner to see if you want to get segment 6. Segment 6 is a big boost over segment 3, but once again, that's like another 3 characters. So with that, I hope I gave you guys all the information you need to make the decision, whether you're a free-to-play and you just have a couple tickets saved up and you're not sure how to use them, or if you are trying to decide whether you want to whip out that credit card and really go crazy on this character or not. That about does it for this video. Everyone's account and everyone's priorities are different, which makes these types of videos very difficult to do, so I hope that you were able to get some useful information out of this and influence your decision one way or another on whether you should grab the character or her segments or not. With that, the guide for the character should be out in the next couple days, so look forward to that. And then in the future, I'm going to have a separate video where I talk about power creep and how it affects games in general, not just this one. And finally, don't forget to join us Friday nights here on YouTube for Friday Night Frontline, where we just do all sorts of nonsense and you just tell me how bad I am at the game,